Hi, everybody. This is Eddie White again at the English Language Testing Society, and I'm doing some interviews with professionals in the field. And last month we talked to somebody from large-scale language testing, and this time we're taking a look at from a perspective of classroom assessment. So I'm interviewing Tahnee Bucher, and Tahnee is at the University of Arizona. Hi, Tahnee, and thanks for agreeing to participate in the interview.
Hi, Eddie. My pleasure to be here.
And so, can we start with? Can you tell us about your experience at the English Center at the University of Arizona and how long you've been working there?
Sure. So I've been teaching here at the University of Arizona at CESL, the Center for English as a Second Language, for 5 years now, almost 6 since 2015.
Right.
And basically, since 2015, I've been involved in assessment-related tasks, which included, for example, reviewing final exams and giving feedback to teachers on their tests and quizzes and other assessments that they would do in their classes. And so that has helped me a lot with my own language assessment literacy. And besides that, I've been working a lot with doing research with respect to assessment. And I'm just really interested in this field in general.
That's great. I know you've been doing some work, of course, with teacher training related to assessment, assessment literacy stuff too. I'm just wondering, does your teacher training also affect your assessment practices as a teacher?
Oh, definitely. It makes me much better as a teacher as well, because I feel like every time that you enhance your assessment experience and you improve your assessment knowledge, you are also, as a byproduct, improving your own teaching as well. And their learning, which is the main goal, I guess.
That's great. Okay, and maybe let me ask you about some of your more recent classroom assessment experience. And so, can you talk a little bit about the classes that you've been teaching recently, maybe in the spring and summer? I think you had some courses.
Yes, so I taught both in the spring and in the summer, and because of the pandemic, right, we had to move online, and so that brought in a whole host of new challenges when it comes to not only teaching, but I think especially with assessment, because assessing online, in a lot of ways, it's quite different than assessing face-to-face, right?
Okay, I want to ask you about that, but just Tahnee, what types of skills and what types of courses have you been teaching and assessing?
Sure. So basically, for the spring and summer, I was teaching an advanced grammar course and a writing course.
I see. Okay. And for those classes, and maybe you can talk to them about them separately or put them together if you like. What kind of challenges did you have assessment-wise with teaching those classes?
Well, I think first of all, a lot of students, so I was teaching both classes synchronously, right? And so most of my assessments, before I actually say this, I'd like to point out that some of the things that I did in the spring, I didn't do in the summer, or some things I did differently because of what I learned and the consequences of what happened to me in the spring.
I see.
And one of them is related to the fact that I was teaching synchronously, right? And so I was giving tests in real time as well. And so that was one of the challenges, because a lot of the students were not in the same time zone as I was. And so maybe the time was not optimal although they were taking the class, the time was maybe not optimal for them to take a test, for example, at like middle of the night or something. And so moving on from the spring into summer, what I started doing was giving tests and assessments that were more asynchronous, if I could, because and also because of the type of skills that I was teaching, right?
Yeah.
And so this was definitely one of the challenges that I faced. And the other one, of course, is cheating, right?
So talk a little bit about that, everybody's favorite subject. What were some of the issues you had there?
And so one of the things that I learned and that I stopped doing as well, or doing less, was, for example, sometimes in class you would do a lot of like multiple choice quizzes or things that are quick and easy for you to check students' knowledge, right? But then when you transfer that into an online environment, you end up sort of with the problem of cheating, of students like trying to share their answers, right? I had one case in which a student said, but teacher, I chose, even though I tried to mitigate those problems, the student told me that, oh, teacher, I chose the same answers as somebody else. Why did I get a D and the other student got an A? Well, I changed the order of the descriptors, right? And so he thought that by just choosing the same letter, he was going to get the same answer. But of course he didn't.
And not realizing that he was telling you what he was doing also.
Exactly. So cheating was a problem with multiple choice. And so the way that I addressed that was, well, I've got to steer away from more those types of assessments that will just require students to fill in the blanks or match or do multiple choice, and do more higher order thinking.
So you mean that assessing students online, it changed the types of tasks that you were using?
Yes, especially for the higher stakes ones. I still did multiple choice quizzes and things like that, but they were lower stakes, and they were just for me to check their knowledge really quick, and it wouldn't really matter if they had cheated or not. Some of those didn't even go into my grade, my final grade. It was just basically for formative assessment.
Tahnee, at the English Center, and as you know, I mean, one of the decisions that people in programs and make is how much control teachers have over the assessments that happen in their classes. And in the classes you've been teaching, I mean, how much control did you have over assessment and grading frameworks and things like that?
So we are asked to follow the university pattern, in which you would have 40% of your grades done by the halfway. So in 4 weeks, you would have to have at least 40%. And then for the last 4 weeks, we would have to get 60% of our grades in.
Do you think that's a good policy to follow generally about you know?
I think so, because it informs students as opposed to just like having one big assessment at the end. So especially in online, I feel like it's very important to have more frequent assessment, even though you don't want to do it every day. Of course, you don't want to overdo it. But I think it's very important to have more frequent low stakes assessment. And having this idea, it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly 40% and 60% in my opinion, but I think it's important to have at least some sort of like substantial grading for the first 4 weeks, and then for the last 4 weeks. For sure.
Yeah, and I think it's probably best practice in general. Even some of the courses that I'm teaching that are not related to teaching English, the advice is to assess students, relatively regularly, and so they know how they're doing, in the courses. Yeah.
And then I think that's another way to curb cheating as well, because I've realized that the more assessments that I gave them, and of course, I'm not saying I overdid it, but I knew my students better,
right,
and what they could do. And so if they happened to cheat in a bigger assignment, then I knew that they cheated because I knew their progress. So it helped me a lot more too, because I was following closely their progress in the class.
Right. So Tahnee, would you say that you've had to change your assessment practices a lot moving online, or mostly you were kind of doing the things you were doing anyway and just making some minor adjustments? Or was it major adjustments or relatively minor?
I think they were, in the grand scheme of things, they were relatively minor adjustments, because yes, assessing online is different in a lot of ways, but you still need to follow the same best practices, right? You still have to have a valid test. You still have to have a reliable test. You still have to have an authentic assessment of your students, right? It has to inform your teaching. It has to help them learn better. So in the grand scheme of things, like I said, I think they were in general minor adjustments, but they were adjustments that needed to be done. Otherwise, it wouldn't work for the online environment.
Yeah. Great, and maybe it's a good point to conclude on, Tahnee. And I mean, even though we're facing with assessing students online, the fundamental things don't change, and you still need to have those valid, reliable assessments that are in place, whether it's online or face to face or however we do it.
Exactly, and you just have, and like for example, and I think, when I go back to the classroom, when I'm not teaching online anymore, or when I'm teaching a face-to-face class, I'm going to apply a lot of the things that I did in my online class and that I would like to do going forward in my face-to-face class as well. Because I think online also affords a lot of opportunities that face-to-face doesn't. Not necessarily for the skills that I was teaching, like writing and advanced grammar, but I'm thinking here in terms of, for example, on oral communication class with presentations and things like that, that students can do on their own using the technology. And so that we don't waste class time, or that we use class time to do other things. So I think that you can incorporate a lot of the online things into the face-to-face whenever we're able to be back.
That's great. And Tahnee, I think you're a good example of the, and you've heard the expression before, I'm sure, that the teacher is also the learner in the classroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. And then you have to learn to adapt too, because what I did in spring too, when I moved on to summer, right, I definitely had to adapt and change and then do things a little bit differently to give me better results.
Okay. Sure. Great. Wonderful. Thanks, Tahnee, for giving us the classroom teacher's perspective on assessment.
Thank you.
Okay.
My pleasure.